Hello and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paul Lewis. I'm the Policy Director here at the Center for Transportation. Welcome to today's webinar, where we're going to be talking about planning for the people, the history and future of inclusive transit planning. Specifically, we're going to be talking about who transit was built for, what purpose does it have, and how has that approach changed over the past 50, 100 years, and what does it mean for the future? We're going to be talking about how transit agencies build with their users in mind. How do they adapt to changing technologies and trends, and what does that mean for the people that are riding and the people of the future that will be riding? When we'll also learn about how some agencies specifically have been incorporating more inclusive, diverse, and equitable solutions into their DNA. To talk about this, we're very lucky to have Krishna Desai, who is Senior Global Marketing Manager at Cubic Transportation Systems, to talk with us today. She's going to run through some slides here that hopefully you're all able to see that, talking about her experience. And one of the unique things that she has working at Cubic is that she gets to work with transit agencies all over the world. She's based in London, which is helpful to hear about some of the things happening in London, and then also can bring in some experiences from different transit agencies across the planet. So what I'm going to do here in just a moment is turn it over to Krishna, who's going to talk through her slides. But in the meantime, just a few housekeeping items. If you're having technical difficulties, often the best thing to do is refresh your browser and rejoin. That tends to work out most issues. If you're still having problems, please use the help button in the lower left corner of your screen. And then we'll be taking questions from the live audience. And so for those of you that are participating, please submit questions for Krishna in the questions function. You should see that on the bottom right corner of your screen. We'll be taking questions after her presentation. So enter your questions there. And if you have any other questions, please use the questions function or the chat function to get a hold of us here at Eno. And hopefully my colleague, Philip Plotch, who is a principal researcher here at Eno, will be moderating the Q&A portion of this. He has had a little bit of technical difficulties, but I'm optimistic he'll join us here in just a few moments. So I'm going to disappear while Krishna walks through her slides. So please go ahead.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, everybody. I'm Krishna, as Paul mentioned. Hopefully, I don't speak too quickly for you. I'm excited to present this webinar for you. So what is mobility? Let's start there. At Cubic, we believe that mobility is a fundamental human right for everybody. It's for the technophiles, the technophobes, the elderly, school children, people with accessibility issues, people traveling with children, and everybody in between. But was mobility really built this way? Now, in a lot of cities around the world, especially in London, where I grew up, mobility was built, specifically trains back then in the 17th century, by men. The system was designed by men for men. A lot of families lived in the rural parts of the country, and there was really no need for women, children, elderly to use transportation. Everything that they needed to access was right there, walking distance away. Whether it was going to their local food markets or butchers to get the foods, they either homeschooled children or schools were walking distances away. People lived nearby, so they didn't really need to access transport. And so transport was really built for the able-bodied man to go into, in London again, the city centre, to do a 9-to-5 role and then to come back home. And so when we look at the infrastructure of a lot of transport systems, like train stations and subways and metros around the world, they weren't really built with elevators or lifts for people using prams or wheelchairs. They're a bit hard to access for those that have those mobility issues. But as we fast forward in time to the present day, who really is the user of our system? And so when I look at this from a marketing lens, I find it really interesting because I always think, who is the user? so many companies spend so much of their money and resources really figuring out who their target market is and who the users of their products and services are. They really want to know everything about you, what age you are, what ethnicity you are, what gender you are, what socioeconomic background you're from, where do you live, who do you hang out with, what do you like, when was the last time you ordered Uber Eats? Like, they want to know everything because they want to know that the products and features that they're building into their roadmaps are suited to you, and therefore you're going to continue to buy from them and use their services and therefore provide revenues for them in the long run. But in transit, we haven't really done this as well. And it may be because how our ticketing systems has transitioned through the years. You know, back in the 17th, 18th century, people used to buy paper tickets. And I remember seeing these videos about the ticket inspectors. They would kind of clip a hole in your paper ticket and count the holes at the end of the day to understand how many journeys took place that day. And that also validated your ticket. Of course, we've evolved since then. And paper tickets soon became smart card systems, contactless payments, mobile technology. But still, a lot of the data we collect is anonymized. We have data in the sense of we know how many transactions happened at a specific station, at a specific day, at a specific time, or how much congestion has increased on the roads or uses of systems generally. But we don't know the people behind those data. We don't know if it's how many children, how many women or female or male people are using the systems, economic background research. And it's hard to do because of the data. And that's easier once you go into account-based ticketing types of solutions, when you can really create an account behind the users so you know who they are. And there's benefits in knowing from them who the users are, so we're providing the right services, but also to help us nudge people to make sure they're acting in the best interest of our systems. Now, in 2019, LA Metro, they actually were the first agency in the US to really do some in-depth research about disaggregated data when it comes to gender. There wasn't as many agencies that had really gone into that level of detail. So they really had to roll up their sleeves and get down to business. They did in-depth workshops, they did surveys, they used the past data that they could, they used any open data sources, and they really came out with a report at the end of it, which is about 170 pages worth of really rich information. And it really showed a lot about the users of the system. Primarily, that many of the users were more women. And women were taking a lot more shorter, frequent trips throughout the day compared to men. There was a lot that they learned about scheduling and payments and siloed information and payment systems, but they also learned a lot about safety. One of the things that I found most important when I read through the report was, of course, it's quite understandable that women would feel unsafe using, buses at night. But from all of those people that responded to the survey, about 40% of users felt unsafe waiting for a bus during the daytime. And that kind of shocked me. During the daytime, people feel unsafe using transit systems. And that information is really critical, because if we didn't know that, how can we really plan for creating better safety measures and building that trust back in the rider for them to really use that mode of transport? Whether it's putting cameras into the buses, whether it's better lighting the bus shelters and having CCTV cameras there, or maybe it's figuring out how people travel from their homes to the bus stops in the first place. If the street isn't even well lit up, then is that also a deterrent for them? And all of this information is really important, because people make decisions on how they even go to their jobs or take those shifts late at night. It all stems from them being able to access transportation. So LA Metro did a great job at collecting a lot of this data and then putting together an action plan for the next couple of years to really help improve the systems, the services, and information that they were doing. Now, being based in the UK, I'd be amiss if I didn't mention TfL, which is Transport for London. One of the things that Transport for London, I think, does a really good job at is actually they have cultural DNA built into their DNA from the 19th century. So in the 1950s, when the World War II happened, a lot of the staff for Transport London, which was what they were called then, they went into war, and they were short of a lot of people to drive buses, to work in their canteens and within the facilities and trains. So they actually did a direct recruitment activity from the Caribbeans. They realized they didn't have enough workforce to fulfill the positions that they had, to keep the economy going, to keep people moving, to keep people needing to go to where they needed to get to. So they did a direct recruitment from the Caribbeans in the 1950s, and since then have continued to employ diverse workforces. But one of my favorite stories about how they've embedded D&I is one of the social activities that the TfL staff used to do was to play football. Well, I guess for you guys it's soccer, to play soccer as a social activity once a week. But they realized that none of the Caribbean employees were taking part. And when they asked the employees why not, the employees had said, well, we've never really played football, soccer before. We're used to playing cricket. Now, what we find in a lot of organizations and a lot of industries is when we talk about inclusivity within the workforce, we try and get the minority to feel comfortable doing what the majority do. Not TfL. They spun it on their head. They said, okay, well, if you've never played football before, we'll learn to play cricket. We're going to change the social activity from it being football to cricket. Something as small as that made that employee base feel so included within that environment. Like, hey, that this organization does care about us. They don't want us to fit in. They want to actually change from the grassroots and embed a quality of change. So since then, they've hired a diverse workforce. And even now you can see it all the way from C-suite down to the bus drivers. All of their workforce has diversity, whether it's gender, age, ethnicity, background, socioeconomic background, even their sexual preferences. There's diversity. And this is really important because when we think about planning for the future of transport and knowing who the customer is, how can we really implement technology, payments, information, and solutions when we don't have the voice of the community embedded within our organizations, really helping us to make the decisions of what we should be doing? And so when people think of London, they think really of diversity and inclusion at the forefront. And one of the reasons why TfL have been so successful is because they ensure that 100% of the population can use their system. They can access information online and offline. They can pay for their transportation through various means. And I just listed some of them here. We deployed contactless bank card payments, so people can just use their bank cards in their wallets to just tap and go. We have QR codes on mobile phones. You know, there's a lot of people coming into the city centre that aren't in London. They come from outside regions into London, and they can pay online on their mobile phones, get mobile ticketing, and use the barcodes to access the systems. We have different Department for Transports that have implemented ITSO cards, which is like a nationalised smart card system. Some people use a Freedom Pass. So those people that are over 60 years in London, they get free travel. So they have their own special unique card, which they can tap and go, and it doesn't charge them anything. Southern also has their own smart card system. We have Google Pay, Apple Pay on your mobile phones, on your smart wearables, and even Apple Transit Express. So when you use your mobile phone to go in and pay into a system, you think, oh my God, what's going to happen if my mobile phone dies? I know I've had this thought many times before. Well, don't fear. In London, we've worked with TfL to enable Apple Transit Express, which means your phone has a small amount of battery life left even after it's died. So if you've tapped in using your mobile phone and your phone dies, you can still tap out with your dead phone and it will take the right amount of fare from you and you won't be charged a fine, which is really cool. And guess what, guys? We still use paper tickets. I live on the outside of London and I still need a paper ticket to travel into London, and that's fine too. And of course, we have the iconic Oyster card system and a specialized Zip Oyster for 11 to 15-year-old students who basically get a really big discount every time they travel. But when you have all of these options for payments so that everybody feels included and they can pay whether they want to pay with cash, card, phone, wallet, you need to make sure that the payment system can actually take these tokens. And that really goes into the design of the systems you're putting out. You'll hear a lot of information about building for mobile first or contactless only strategies. But you really need to have the fundamental of closed loop ticketing, so a smart card-based system as the foundation infrastructure before you start building into other things like open loop, mobile, and things like that. And TfL learned this as well. So they learned that their stations weren't really accessible when they built them, 17th century. And over the past couple of weeks in the UK, we've had something called Crossrail, which is one of the biggest infrastructure projects that was taking place in Europe, connecting the east and west of the UK together. And 2 weeks ago, we opened up the Elizabeth line, which was connecting the east and west of London to make transport so much more seamless for people to get from one side of London to the other side of London. And as part of this, Transport for London actually partnered with an agency called Transport for All, which is kind of a disabled-led advocacy group to really ensure that whatever you're building in your systems, whether it's transport or other industries, you're building with accessibility and inclusivity in mind from the get-go. And so London actually opened up 11 new stations as part of Elizabeth line and upgraded a further 33 stations for this. And they were built completely with accessibility in mind. Everything from the stations, elevators, right the way down to the color that they chose, because they realized that people with visual impairments, they want them to have the same experience. They want them to be able to read the information clearly, see the lines, and have that really great user experience so that they want to continue using transport and make it as easy for them as possible. And this is really important because as we were talking about, having multiple modes of tokens for people to pick how they travel, it's great to think about the future of transport being digital. We're getting swept away by this digital notion. Mobile phones are great, especially as COVID hit and we wanted to become a touchless society. Contactless payments was great, and all of this was helping to provide safety concerns, issues for travelers to easily tap and pay for their payments or use the systems. But not everybody has access to mobile phones. Not everybody owns a contactless bank card, especially in the US. And this is a slide that I found for the UK specifically, but I'm sure a lot of this information is probably similar in US and other parts of the world, where there's this really big digital divide. A lot of the population, especially those that need transit the most, probably don't have the means to pay with mobile phones or contactless payments. So as we're thinking about designing the future, let's not leave those people behind. Let's think about information and systems that are inclusive of those, especially when we think about areas that still don't have really good 4G, yet alone 5G. And if you're relying on them to have mobile phones to pay and access ticketing and do real-time passenger information, it's not going to work out. They're not going to have a good user experience, and they're most likely going to just go back into their cars and pick something that's easier for them to use. So some of the things that agencies have been deploying as a way of really helping in that terms of equity is, how do we as an industry start providing an equitable system for people to use our services, especially within transport? And there's a conversation about free fares, and should agencies be providing free fares for all users to help increase people using public transport again, and because it's a public good. But the loss of revenue means that a lot of people, these agencies still have to fund the services. And quite often, the people that rely on these services the most need reliable transportation. They need to get to their jobs on time, because if they don't, they're going to get made redundant, fired, and they can't afford it. So they need services to be provided that are accurate, that are going to get them to where they need to. They need to make sure that they have seats, and it's not being congested by people who now will use the system because it's free, where they otherwise would have used their own legs and walked, or cycle, or micromobility, or another means. So as we're thinking about this and thinking about equitable payment solutions and how to get riders onto our systems, here's some examples of what other agencies have done. So New York recently, end of February, announced a pilot that they'll be doing to introduce fare capping. And they have provided it in a way where you pay for 13 journeys, and after that, it's free for the week, providing that you're using the same payment token. And within the first month of the pilot, they've had about 168,000 people reach fare capping, which collectively has saved that group over $1 million in fares, which I think is great. There's the Clipper Start program, where the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, MTC, in the Bay Area launched a Clipper Start program. So they partnered with agencies like Muni, Caltrans, Select, Golden Gate Transit, and Ferry routes, as well as BART, to provide discounted fares for low-income riders. It's a 18th month pilot, which has begun in 2020. And since then, they've had about 17 more agencies join in that program and offer discounted fares, anywhere between 20 to 50% for those low-income riders. Again, incentivizing them to use a system, but actually rewarding the people that use your system the most and need your system the most. And of course, Transport for London, we've been doing fare capping for years based on the zone you're in, based on the area you're in, daily, weekly, monthly. No matter how you travel, you will know that you will be charged the best fare for your journey for that day, week, or month. But Sadiq Khan, our mayor, in 2016, launched this initiative called the Bus Hopper, where he realized that a lot of people that were taking trips on the buses had to take multiple journeys to get to their end destination. And collectively, it was costing them a lot more than if it was just a single ride. So what he proposed was, within the hour, if somebody uses the bus more than twice, the third ride onwards is free. And since then, pre-pandemic levels, there was about 450,000 people using that hopper service every day. And just goes to show like how many people are saving money from implementing these types of solutions. And so what's another way we can plan the future of transit to make sure it's inclusive and that both agencies are getting something that's equitable and inclusive and providing a unified experience, as well as the end traveler? And I think something that's going to become a lot more popular in the future is going to be regional transit planning. Not just planning for your agency in this one community in one area for one mode, but actually breaking the silos. It's finally time we start thinking about the end user, the traveler, as a user for all of our systems. And so they need a seamless journey where they have a really good experience. They don't care who's getting the money for the systems they're using. They just want to be charged the best fare, get a consolidated customer experience. And we're seeing a lot more agencies and regions coming together and really providing that. So San Francisco Bay Area, again, is another example where they introduced a Clipper system, and the MTC work with 23 other agencies to create a single robust account and a back office system where they can, operate over 25% of the journeys there. And it's really important because when we think about each individual systems, they all have their own individual, what we call business rules or fare rules. So a fare rules is essentially how much you charge for a flat rate for a student versus a non-student at peak time, non-peak time, from point A to B to point C to D. Like there's different fares for different people at different times. And there's about 19,000 of them in the Bay Area alone. And so imagine how hard and complex it would be for somebody to ensure that they're buying the right tickets for the right prices, and how easy it can be when we come together and create this unified back office experience, and therefore they get the same Clipper experience no matter who they're riding. And sorry, just got a random pop-up shop. Sorry, pop-ups. It's never a good webinar if you don't have any IT issues, right? But it's not just for big cities. Like regional transportation can be for smaller regions as well. And BC Transit is another great example of this. Earlier this year, BC Transit, which serves about 1.8 million British Columbians, have joined together with 30 regional operators to implement a new platform-based fare collection system where it will be implemented across two phases. One, for app and smart card users, like I said, build with closed loop in mind, and then add in open payments afterwards. And then phase two was contactless bank payments with ability to pay with Apple and Google Pay. And that's really exciting because now, again, the end user can experience this unified system, which is going to be the UMO system, across all of these different 30 transit providers, using the same card to pay, using the same apps to pay, using the same journey planning to pay and plan their journeys without having to worry about each individual token type for each individual user. And that's really what's going to help bounce back travelers into public transit and deter them from using their own cars. And as we're thinking about how we break the silos and how do we really build for and plan for inclusivity, it really does begin with ourselves and having a really hard look at ourselves. It starts off from what Transport for London had done in regards to, recruiting from the Caribbean and actually having the voices of the community be embedded within their workforce. Our organizations, all of us, need to take a long, hard look at ourselves and really understand, are the people in our organizations really the voices of the community we're trying to sell our services to or provide our services to? And there's a lot of industry organizations that are already coming up with pilots and schemes that we can all get involved with and build together as a community and learn together and build these lessons learned. And an example is WTS, that's Women's Transportation Society, along with ITS America, have launched a Mobility XX pledge, which essentially is encouraging members to join this pledge and help find ways to increase the workforce of women by 10% in the next 10 years. And then you have other organizations like APTA, who have just launched last month in May, the racial equality plan and pilot, where they, again, encouraging employees and organizations to join and really take a long, hard look at themselves and audit themselves to say, are the policies and practices that they have recruiting the best talents? Are they inclusive of people from these communities that can come and work there? Anything from the way you're putting out your job specifications and requirements. Are you subconsciously being biased towards a certain demographic of people and not including them even in that pool of candidates when you're recruiting? Are we doing anything actively to make sure that we're challenging ourselves to find the best candidates and being members of different organizations to recruit people, and really shake up the DNA makeup of our companies? And the reason why this is really important is, it's probably a really bad metaphor to give, but I'm going to do it anyway. I like to live on the edge. It's like having a product director for tampons be a man. They're never going to use the product. They're never going to know the pain points us women feel. So how can they really come up with the best designed product for us? So how, as an industry, are we going to do the same thing when we probably are putting out procurements and solutions out there for a problem we think exists that might not even exist? Why don't we speak to the end users and travelers and ask them, what is the problem you're facing when it comes to using public transport? What is more important to you, free fares or reliable systems and services? I guaranteed, being from a low income household growing up myself, it's less about the fares and more about getting to school on time or getting to my soccer practice on time. But we're never going to know unless we have those voices within our organizations. Let's get comfortable being uncomfortable. And so one of the final thoughts I wanted to leave you with is, it's not just enough us as an industry working together, but we really need to work more with academics and startups and people outside of our organizations as well to really build the next generation of technologies and services. So one thing Cubic is doing is we've actually partnered with McMaster University in Canada. And before we go guns blazing, like we can do in typical Cubic style, being like, we want to create this technology, we think it's going to be great for the industry. No, we're going to take a step back and we're going to go to research. We're going to work with academics to research the use spaces and say, what is the problem that you're facing? How can we make your lives better? How can we create a better customer experience for you? And then doing some testing and prototyping before we go guns blazing into building the products. And currently we're working on things from VR experiences, so we can actually take a journey in somebody's shoes, whether they're disabled in a wheelchair or have visual disabilities, or whether it's a woman with a pram. You can simulate these types of scenarios now with gamification and VR experiences, so that you can really feel what it's like to walk a life or do a journey through the lens of these users. And therefore, you're really building with these people in mind. it's time we stop learning to build for the many and discluding a whole population of people, and we start building for the few. Because when we start building for the few and the people that need the services the most, the accessible people, low income people, they're not an add-on. Actually, you should be building with them at the forefront, because once you've implemented that system, it's going to be available for everybody. Everybody's going to have an amazing customer experience. So let's not forget to do that. And I know I've probably rambled and spoke quickly, and I don't know if my accent was understandable or not, but if there's nothing else you took from this meeting, please just remember two things. One, how can you design for a future without those voices of the communities within your organizations? Right the way up from policy level, because they're determining what kinds of policies and budgets agencies are getting in the first place to deploy these solutions. If the person that's creating the policy in the first place is driving cars and happy in their 5 million mansion houses, they might not be allocating the right amount of money and resources to what we need. So we need to get together and start lobbying to get the funds that we need. Once we have the funds, make sure we're using it in the best way to serve the communities. Never leave anybody behind. Make sure you build with closed loop first before you start thinking about contactless payments, mobile capabilities. And remember that the future of history, we've come so far in 200 years. When we're planning for the future isn't 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. Like the future is 50 years and 100 years as well. And quite often it's easy to think short term because people need to be re-elected into power. And so a lot of the decisions we make and technology we deploy is very short-term focused for the next 2 to 3 years. But if we really want to build a system that's equitable for the long run, we really need to start thinking about the next 10 years and 15 years and thinking long-term and making sure that we're all aligned politically as well as our social public policy equity goals. And with that, I'll finish my webinar.
Thanks for the presentation, Krishna. Krishna, it's you have this broad perspective and a global perspective, and I think I appreciate it, and I'm sure our attendees are appreciating this also. So all of you, in case you missed the beginning, you can ask questions. You can also upvote. So if you click on upvote, your question will go to the top of the list, and we're more likely to have time to answer it. So Krishna, let me ask you, I'm going to take two questions that were pretty popular. One asking about privacy of data, and then the other one was asking about how we can access this demographic data to understand our customers better. So a transit agency would like to know who's writing our system, but a lot of the information they're not able to access because of privacy issues. But then other people are concerned about the privacy issues. Can you talk a little bit about that balance between access?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important question because, and that's why I think it's one of the reasons why we haven't collected the data so far is because we're always so cautious that we don't want to jeopardize that privacy of data. So that's always been at our forefront as an industry. And that's why we've never collected data as much now as other industries have. And I think that's when something like account-based technology is really going to come into place. So an example is like in London, for example. I feel like most of my examples are going to be London-based, so sorry about that, audience. But in London, you can get an Oyster card system. You can buy an Oyster card and it can be totally anonymized. You can buy it, you don't register it to yourself, like it's anonymized taps that are going through. And there's pros and cons of that, right? The pros are, the cons are for the user that if they lose that card, they've lost the money that was on that card. And so it's not helpful for them. And so for them, we're trying to say, hey, if you now create an account, so register your Oyster card with your account, again, we're still processing that data as an agency, as anonymized data. We still see those transactions come through as token 123, token 345, or whatever it might look like anonymized in the back end. But for that user, they can now go in and actually opt in to have their data shared. So those people that are using smart cards or whatever, they can actually opt in to say, I don't mind you knowing who I am, or giving some of that information at the forefront, like I'm a woman, this is it, this is who I am, this is where I'm traveling to, this is typically what my journeys look like. Because they sometimes want to get that benefit back. Like people will give up data if they're getting something back from their data. And a lot of time, if you can say, well, if you know who you are, if you've lost your smart card, then you can actually register and tell us that you've lost it. We'll freeze that account and we'll transfer the funds onto a new card and give it to you. Okay, well, that's pretty winning for me, because I lose my card all the time. So if there was a way for me to give you my information and know that, hey, when my card is lost, there's an easy way for my $20, $25 on my card to be put onto another card, that's great. Or maybe you know, I think the future is also going to be incentivization and nudging people. Like if we know who the riders of the systems are, we can better plan for that network and providing the services at that time. So we can probably nudge people's behaviors and say, look, if we know who you are and you give us your data, we promise we're only going to use it for the purposes of transport and making sure your experience is going to be as effective as possible. So if we know you, Krishna, Desai, are going to be using our systems every Monday to Friday, 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock, or every other day, but we know there's been a massive disruption in that service, we can notify you and let you know, hey, there's been a massive disruption to the service. What if you could join, you know, could you come in, use a system half an hour earlier or half an hour later, and it's going to be a lot more easier for your journey. Or maybe we can incentivize them with rewards is becoming a new thing now as well, and loyalty programs, and people can collect tokens. And it's something that we're doing as part of one of our UMO reward system, where we're trying to, you know, create nudging and get loyalty rewards for acting in the best interest of the network. And you can redeem those points to get discount on fares, or maybe get like third-party services like coffees or teas or something like that. So I think it's a mix. And I think a lot of users are giving away their data like a lot now these days. They just want something back for it, and they have to trust that the information is going to be kept securely and kept for the purposes that they've intended for it to be. And I think a lot of people do have that trust in transport agencies.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. If people have an incentive to provide and share the demographic information, they'll be more likely to use it. So there's another question about this one's from Brooklyn, about different fare media and whether different fare media work better for different types of people.
Yes. So it's all about choice. Like, we live in a democracy. We should have access to choice, right? Like, I'm a person who's in my 30s. I have my credit card with me. I travel a lot internationally. So when I go to New York now as a Londoner, I love the choice that I can actually just pull out, you know, or we'll be able to just use my bank card to tap and go. I love the convenience. But there might be people that are in New York currently, as an example, that they don't have that access to that card, and they actually would like to know how much they're paying for transit upfront. And therefore they would like to, you know, put money on a smart card and know that the money they've got in a smart card is going to keep them have enough money for their travel for the next week or a month. And because the highest cost to those, especially from low income groups, is transport, is one of the big factors. So they want to know that that's paid for at the, you know, off the bat, and then they can spend the rest of their disposable income as they need to. Some people don't want to have mobile phones, and some people do. You know, some people are like, I'm on my phones the whole time. If I can, you know, just use a virtualized credit card on my phone or like an app or something and tap and go, I'm happy to do that. But in other areas, there's not 4G, you know, there's not 3G. People don't feel safe standing at a bus station, as we saw in LA Metro during the daytime. So imagine if it's like a deprived community where they're now scared as well that if they pull out their phone, they might be more likely to get robbed. And so they feel unsafe in that environment. So that's why it's really important, because everybody should have that choice. And especially all users are different as well. Like when we're thinking about contactless bank cards, again, it's great for somebody like me that wants to use it. A child doesn't have access to a bank card. Like, how are they going to use your system? They still need a means to pay. Same for, you know, people that are tourists in a city. They might not, you know, want to pay by the same ways that, you know, locals are paying for it. So it's just about, you know, as easy as we make it to include everybody to pay, they're more likely to use our system and not get an Uber. Let's be real, you know.
Yeah, you mentioned tourists. In part of what agencies should be doing because of that sort of the varied number of people that they have who both live within a city and are coming from a different city.
Yes. So I think like tourism is important as well, because, you know, as we're trying to like bound back and everybody's traveling again, whether it's domestically or regionally, I think one of the slides I mentioned was about like planning at a regional level, not at a like localized level, becomes really important. Because if you can then use the same payment token, so BC Transit as an example, or like Clipper, you can use your Clipper card in the Bay Area to access most of the transport agencies and modes and stuff like that. You don't have to use a different system, and therefore you're more likely to just use what's in your wallet to pay and go. Like, it becomes second nature to you. Now, if I'm a tourist coming to the Bay Area and I'm like, okay, well, I have to educate myself. What is the smart card system? Like, how does it work and all of this stuff? But if I could just use my contactless bank card now and be like, actually, I don't need to think about all of this stuff. Do I have enough credit? Do I need to top up or not? I can use what's in my pocket to pay and go. That's good for visitors who, they don't want a discount. They don't want to get, loyalty rewards and stuff. They just want to quickly pay and go as painless and as frictionless as possible, because they just want to travel easier. So I think, in London, when we deployed the smart card, when we deployed contactless payments, we've seen about cards used from over like 180 different countries within our system. Wow. So it shows you that people love to like pay and with what's in their pocket without having to think about, I need to get an Oyster card, I need to top up. Like, is this zones 1, 2, 3? How much is it going to charge me? They can know that they can just tap and go and be charged the right fare. But again, that's not the best interest of, a local person that wants fare capping, that wants to know that they've got discounts on their card, or students or things like that. So I think, for tourists, it's really important to make it easy for them as possible, so that they use your systems. And it's a great way to travel around a city, and it's helping you with your CO2 emission targets as well, if they're not getting Ubers or cars or stuff, and that's going to be different again per region, because some places might not have the infrastructure built for public transport in the first place, so they might need to rely on cars and things. But that's when we have to really think about demand responsive transit and those kinds of solutions, and like, car sharing and parking rights and those kinds of systems to, again, reduce congestion on the roads and still get people like to travel in the best interest of the network.
Yeah. Somebody asked about integrating different modes. So the idea of using a bike share, and then you're going on to a bus, or you're going on to a train, maybe park and ride. You just mentioned park and ride. Have you thought much about how to integrate all of those? And are there any good examples of places that are doing a really good job of integrating them?
Obviously, I'm going to say London, so I'm trying to pick another country. But let's pick another country, even Sydney. So Sydney, they're using the Opal system at the minute. And you can use your Opal card to pay for all of the different modes of transport. So you can use it to pay for ferries, buses, trams, DLRs, even now Ubers and things like that, using your same Opal card. And it's interesting, and bike share and cycle hire. And so a lot of cities are doing that. London's doing the same. And we're finding this is also true for a lot of, you hear the notion of mobility as a service a lot in our industry. And everybody thinks it's about just having an app that you can now have an app to pay for first mile, last mile. But actually the integrating part is the heavy lift. It's about integrating all the different modes, and London does it beautifully, and Sydney does it beautifully. And we're seeing a lot more cities in the US do it, where you want to have one app, one payment provider to take your payments. They don't care if it's going to an Uber or a bike share or, a bus operator or whoever else it's going to. They just want to plan their trip, find the best route for them, whether it's the most economical or the green, greenest way, safest way, quickest way, whatever way, pay for that trip, and then tap and go when they come across those services. The integration and the platform is the hard bit. And that's when you really need a sophisticated back office to be able to work with these different organizations to make sure that they're onboarded to a system properly, make sure that the policies created are equitable for all parties involved, so that everybody's getting a good deal out of it. Otherwise, you're going to get this siloed approach again, where you have Uber that's doing the best interest of Uber. You're going to have bike share doing what's interest of bike share, e-scooters. Everybody's going to be doing their own marketing campaigns, their own integration systems. And then it's ultimately who's responsible for safety, who's responsible for those e-bikes being left on the side of the walk, and who's, responsible for safety on the roads of these micromobility drivers. So I think agencies really need to take control of their regions and know that there's going to be micromobility providers coming into their cities, and they want to control it. They want to create the policies. They want to learn about what's happened, good and bad. Again, Transport for London gave a good example of this. And before, they didn't really think much about Uber, and then, it took over the system. And so when it came to scooters and e-scooters, they actually were like, no, we're going to really consider this. And they've worked in partnership with Tier Bikes, and they're providing a pilot, but they've defined the realm in which this micromobility provider can work within. And they say, if you want to operate in our city and use our systems, then you have to adhere to these policies. You have to make sure that, people aren't traveling more than 25 miles an hour. You're going to make sure each each cycle is docked properly. You need to make sure that they're not lying around, pedestrian safety, like all of these things that, you have to think about from a holistic point of view, then be integrated for that seamless experience. And again, payment tokens and stuff, it has to be part of, if it was in Clipper, those 19,000 fare rules, now you're going to have additional fare rules as part of that system. Like it needs to, be built into that system.
Yeah. Krishna, thanks. This integration, I wish we had a lot more time to talk about this, but we've run out of time. I definitely appreciated your insight today into inclusive transit planning and all those other topics we talked about. I want to thank you. I want to thank all of our participants in today's webinar. You can find slides and a recording of the webinar on our website, enotrans.org. And the recording will also be mailed to everybody who registered. Please, everybody sign up for our mailing list. You can gain access to our newsletter, our webinar announcements, report releases, and more. Ebino is happy to offer our webinar series free of charge. If you enjoy them, check out the link in the chat box about donating or becoming a member. And make sure to sign up for our next webinar. It's on the 22nd of June, and it's titled The IIJA in Play 6 months later. And we're going to be exploring the state of federal funding for infrastructure 6 months after the bipartisan infrastructure law was signed. Krishna, thanks again, and everybody have a great day.
Thank you.